Good morning. You're listening to Drinking Socially, the official Untappd podcast.
Your inside look into what's happening in the Untappd community and the world of beer.
I'm John, and I don't even have a cellar or a basement anymore, but in their absence, I've made good use of a small shelf in my closet, which I call the cellar. Today, we're going to talk about how beers end up there in any cellar, not just my closet, but some of the things you should think about if you're planning to dedicate some of your own closet to this hobby.
And I'm Harrison, and barrels, cellars, darkness, maybe a little magic. I mean, most importantly, patience and willpower. Those are kind of the things that are on our minds today as we finally drink some of those beers we bought years ago to be consumed on some vague future day for some elusive but sure to be important reason we made up at the time. So today's that day. So go ahead and grab one out of your cellar too, a beer you've been kind of sitting on and waiting for an excuse to drink. Now is a better time than ever. So, and kind of join us on this journey.
And I'm Jenn, a fellow podcaster that's lucky enough to join John and Harrison on a dive into our cellars in the second part of this episode. So we've all been spending more time at our home bars. This has been a great opportunity to open something special. I can't wait to see what everyone's been saving.
And as a reminder, your Drinking Socially is released every other Wednesday morning and can be found at podcast.untappd.com.
Or wherever you listen to podcasts.
This has kind of become, the new norm. We say it every time we do this now, but we're going to say it again today. And really kind of one of my favorite segments too, the weekend catch-up, where John and I kind of go back and forth about what we've been drinking, seeing in the beer world on the news side of things. Just kind of keep it casual and just, do a quick little catch up. I know John's been getting some pretty cool beers in recently. What'd you kind of come across this past weekend?
Yeah, I had a great experience with an online company. I know them as Beer Drop. And it's just, I think it's been long enough.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to say this with couth. I love supporting my local breweries and my local businesses, but it was really nice. Beer Drop was able to send some beers straight from Colorado. They're generally small, local Colorado breweries, and I was really excited to get my hands on, I'm going to say karate cake or carote.
I get it.
I won't say it right, but it's a play on carrot cake from Fiction Brewing. And they actually collaborated with Tattered Flag, who's in Pennsylvania. They're a veteran-owned brewery.
Yeah.
And the write-up about the beer, it was just exciting as the beer. They wanted to create something with similar characteristics to carrot cake.
Nice.
So not too much or too little of any ingredient. They started with a simple Berliner, some Pilsner malt, some wheat, a little bit of oats, and for the air quotes carrot cake simulation, it was 100 pounds of carrot juice, dark brown sugar, golden molasses, some lactose, and restrained, usage of nutmeg and cinnamon, because those two things will carry anything away. But that beer, I remember drinking it. It was an instant 5-star for me, which is kind of rare. And I drank a few before, but it nailed it, man. It was a Berliner carrot cake in a can, and it was so much fun to drink. I shared it with my wife last weekend, and I got a lot of comments on that check-in on Untappd as well, which was kind of cool to go back and talk about how that all worked.
Yeah.
What about you, Harrison? What have you been drinking?
Yeah. So I grabbed a beer this weekend that I've heard talked about a lot for a couple of different reasons. The first thing about this beer that jumped out to me before I had ever had it was its name, and it kind of sent me down this path. It's called Reptar Juice, so kind of referencing dinosaurs and, Rugrats and my youth and all that stuff. So that right away kind of piqued my interest. And then it's from 26 Acres Brewing Company in Concord, North Carolina. And it's a New England style IPA. And it was really good. But something interesting about it that I've kind of keep coming across again and again is it's what I would classify this as like a starburst beer, which is really just a category I made up as far as I know.
Sounds amazing.
Right.
Yeah.
But I felt like I've been having a lot of juicy, sweet, forward New England style IPAs that still had some nice bitterness to it, but there was definitely like a starburst characteristic that really couldn't be ignored. I'm having more and more of these. So as I drank this beer, I was like, it's kind of describes itself as, well, it's got Mosaic and Citra in it, which kicks off a lot of haze and a lot of fruit flavors and oats and this nice hazy orange beer that was delicious, but it was very Starbursty, and I keep seeing that again and again. So I felt like, all right, what am I going to call this category in my own head? And here I am sharing it with you guys. I feel like it's happening enough now where, yeah, it's useful to say now pre beer, each one I have, is this going to be a Starburst one or something else? And kind of start to evolve it that way. So it was great. Again, very juicy, some residual sweetness. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. So only about 5,000 check-ins on Untappd, but if you're a dinosaur fan and an IPA fan, maybe you can get your hands on it somehow, trade however you can. Because it was cool and great artwork as well. Definitely checked all my boxes.
I love the idea that it kind of in your head created this Starburst IPA or New England Starburst category. But I as you explained it, I know exactly what you're talking about. Right. You've got like the New England IPAs taking two different, probably 12 different paths.
Right. But I know there's so much divergence in there right now. It's in that category, and it's really as exciting and new as it relatively is. It's also kind of been untouched for a while. There hasn't been, at least like you have their milkshake IPA and like stuff like that have been happening. Sour IPAs, sour milkshake IPAs. So there's some variation happening there, but really kind of, I think it's worth looking into the category a little more and highlighting some nuances, because there is no, as we're kind of learning, one kind of New England style IPA. And that was just an easy way to do it, to jump to, just like the Rugrats took me back to my youth. Starburst take me back to my youth. I'm sure I enjoyed them together more than once back in the day, and it kind of was a natural fit. Just popped right in my head, so it was good. In terms of news, I didn't come across a ton, but I know, John, you saw a cool story you wanted to share, and this is great.
Yeah, I think just looking for news, we're all probably living in the news, whether you want to be or not lately. But one article I read, it was nice. It was an optimistic article, and it comes from Goose Island Brewery, namely their Chicago location. But the sentiment behind it, I love. They've effectively kind of taken the Ice Cream Man business model,
right,
and built, this Goose Island van. And you can kind of place your orders. And I think they were even playing like ice cream truck music for a while, and they drive through the neighborhood. And as long as, I believe the ruling was, you have to place your order from their app, or place your order ahead of time, so that they won't just like drive down the street throwing beer yet. Right, it's not that perfect of a world yet.
Right.
But that, I think, is, I love seeing or hearing about breweries that are able to kind of pivot their business model and do this, which has got to be helping make life a little bit easier. And realistically, in any normal that we live in, the world where an ice cream truck can deliver me a 4-pack of beer right on my front porch, that's great. I hope to see more breweries able to kind of get a little creative and inject some fun into the world that we all live in right now.
Yep, definitely could use a little more fun. That's what I thought of when you told me that story. It just seemed like kind of like a nice, lighthearted thing but who couldn't use more of that? That's great. That's awesome.
And so the beer that we're about to review is not the product of an ice cream truck delivery, but I was really fortunate enough that Harrison kind of picked this beer up and was like, "Yeah, I got a couple. You want me to swing by?" And so we're able to drink. On part one of this show, we're going to both drink the same beer, and it's only because Harrison was my ice cream man for a brief moment before he threw a beer at me and kept driving by. But
I don't stop.
Harrison, would you be so kind as to explain how we landed on this beer to kind of kick off our cellaring episode, and what your thought process was on it?
Yeah, really, there are a couple different things that went into it. As you kind of alluded to, we have more than one of them. So we each have two of these beers, and as we'll discuss as we kind of drink them today and talk about cellaring beer, it's nice to have two of them. So you can drink one now and one later. And so it started there as that simple realization of, well, we can do that with this beer. And then also it's something that we feel, it won't be impossible to find. It should be out there and you should be able to get your hands on it, which is great too. Something we're obviously trying to consider. It's more fun to drink along than it is to go, man, I wish I could get my hands on that. So those are really kind of the two driving factors, if I remember correctly. Although, was there something else I'm forgetting, John?
I remember that discussion, at least 50% of it, and I think that was it. It's available. It's sort of, if we can air quotes, in season right now. This beer,
right? And
you made a really good point about, if you can only get your hands on one can or bottle of beer, you should, in my opinion, you should drink it. If you're going to start cellaring, and we'll touch on some of this thoughtful education as we kind of drink through this beer. But I love, and it kind of propelled what the beer cellaring episode that we're doing right now. But also, we have an extra can of this beer that we purchased at the same time that's going to sit on my closet shelf that we're going to do another episode on next year.
Right.
And we'll be able to kind of draw back to the tasting notes from this episode and how a year in my closet changed it, or a year behind Harrison's cows changed the beer a little bit.
What happened? I know this is going to be really cool to have today's episode easy to look back to and listen to next year when we crack open beer number 2 of this and say, oh, that's right. We were talking a lot about coffee last year, and this year it's all about chocolate or whatever it ends up being. So yeah, that's really cool. So let's talk about this beer itself. And actually, let's go ahead and start opening them up and stuff too, which is the fun part. Let's go ahead and crack them, and I'm gonna give us the quick 411 or whatever on this beer. Ooh, there it is. So today we are fortunate to have a barrel-aged narwhal from Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, which is their American Imperial Stout, clocking in at there we are, 11.9% ABV, 50 IBUs. If you were with us in the From Russia with Love episode, these Imperial Stouts can really get up there in bitterness. So great to see that. And from Sierra Nevada, as they describe it, barrel-aged narwhal is our deliciously dark Imperial Stout aged in Kentucky bourbon barrels. Barrel aging is a strange science and mellows some characteristics of the original beer while intensifying others. Narwhal's aggressive roastiness is calm, but the rich chocolate-like malt backbone is brought to the fore. Black as midnight, this intense stout is complex with notes of cocoa and espresso balanced with hints of vanilla and toasted coconut from the oak casks that it rested in. So I love this base beer, just Narwhal. I think it's one of those under-celebrated Imperial Stouts. And then to add some bourbon to it, things get really exciting. So I'm going to go ahead and pour mine. We'll get into this.
I have taken the liberty of pouring mine while Harrison ran down the spec sheet on this beautiful beer. And the nose, without getting it too granular, it just, man, that's a beautiful pour, Harrison.
Yeah,
as I can see through the Zoom chat, that's gorgeous. Right. Thank you, John Scholl, for the clean glass episode in episode 9. That was something I took to heart. I couldn't go out locally and buy special detergent, but Amazon was really helpful.
There you go.
The nose on this beer, I get like Easter dark chocolate candies. It's
yep. I'm getting what I get is like vanilla, coconut, chocolate. It's that, man. I don't know if this is accurate, but I'm going to say it anyway. I feel like when you bourbon barrel age a really well-made Imperial Stout, bourbon, there's almost like a universal, that toasted from the oak kind of vanilla coconut thing. It jumps out right away. And I've had that experience from multiple bourbon barrel aged stouts. And this one greets me again with something that, a familiar surprise, if you will. Didn't know exactly what to expect. Obviously had a good idea, but this thing is just taking me to a lot of different places right now.
Yeah, I'll agree with that completely. I mean, effectively, it's the same sort of flavoring that whiskey goes through, or bourbon goes through, sitting in those barrels. Right. I'm I'm going to get in here and
do it.
take a little taste of this guy.
Let's get in there.
Okay. The bitterness is there for me. The 50 IBUs, I think of them differently in a stout than in a hop. I think of this more as like a little bit of bitter chocolate, but all of the notes they imply, the vanilla and the coconut are there subtly for me, but I can easily find like black coffee, dark chocolate, those flavors, but it's nothing too aggressive. It tastes like a really expensive chocolate bar.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was getting to. Baker's chocolate, that kind of bitter, sweet characteristics you find in like really intense dark chocolate. The vanilla is still there. The coconut's happening. It kind of reminded me of espresso right away. And it looks great too. I mean, the jet black, the tan head, like all those exciting things that you look forward to in a bourbon barrel-aged stout. It's all happening. Yeah, man. Yeah, you're right. It's like very clean. You can tell it's just like, and truthfully, I'm excited to age this now more than I was a couple of minutes ago, because I think that the vanilla is going to do something. The coconut's going to go somewhere. The chocolate may show up more. Usually, kind of a lot of those malty, sweeter characters tend to accentuate over time. So, will that happen here? And to what degree? Will we get more caramel and toffee, or is it going to just be like, I don't know, like a milk chocolate? It's only time will tell, truly. But there's like a lot. You could see like a lot of things that could happen with this beer given some time. Although, of course, it should be said this is already it is a bourbon barrel aged beer. It's already the base beer has spent some time.
It's already been in someone's cellar.
Exactly, for a while. But I'm pumped to see what we can do with it now and what happens next. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This is just so well made. It's awesome. I'm pumped. I'm also excited to have it kind of warm up as we talk about this and talk about cellaring. I'm sure we're going to keep revisiting this over the next couple of minutes, and it's going to taste like a new beer each time, which is always fun too.
Absolutely. I wish I had some dried fruits or something to kind of go back and forth with on this beer. For some reason, doing the podcast at home, I have even less food to perhaps pairing this with a room temperature SpaghettiO.
Right. Aged from yesterday.
No, we'll stick with beer.
Yeah.
But I agree. The thing that immediately comes to mind is someone that has failed at cellaring as many beers as I've succeeded in. Let's not go into cellaring yet. Let's talk about this beer if I have to reel myself in. So the nose we've kind of talked about, because I'm really excited to review this beer in a year from now. And if we're fortunate, even buy a fresh one and drink, 2021 or whatever, bourbon barrel aged narwhal next to this cellared version. We covered the nose. We covered the taste. Can we add mouthfeel on here? If there's one thing I expect to change in a year, it's not carbonated like you would expect, a big fresh Pilsner to throw off these big CO2 bubbles, but it has, the mouthfeel on here, it gives me somewhat of a clean finish. There's a little bit of life in this beer as I kind of like swirl it around trying to pick up some flavors.
Sure.
And I would expect that to dwindle comfortably after a year. I'm hopeful.
Yep. And
if we could only fast forward.
Yeah. And John alluded to me doing an aggressive pour to kind of use the CO2 that's in there, because you're going to lose a lot of that. You'll lose all of it barrel aging it, and you can obviously carbonate it when you're packaging this beer, which they for sure did. And I'm trying to figure out if they also can condition this beer in particular, like they do almost all their core range. Can't tell, but yeah, kind of use that CO2 that is in there. It's definitely lower carb than big old Pilsner that's kind of looks like champagne jumping out of the glass with big bubbles. But use that CO2 to just carry the aroma. So definitely give this thing a nice aggressive pour. And it's in terms of what's going on with it on Untappd. So a couple of different obviously variants of it each year that it comes out, but we're seeing about 41,000 total check-ins, 36,000 uniques, more than 1,000 this month, which is great too. I believe it comes out, and I could be wrong here, but around like the beginning of the year each year traditionally comes out. This one was canned in late December, which is pretty cool. So already sitting around.
Okay, so it's been sitting around a little bit, not to its detriment at all. There's one thing as we kind of look at Untappd, Harrison. There's the barrel-aged narwhal beer that you can check into, and then there's, the 2019, 18, 16, 15 variants of those beers.
Yeah.
We were talking about this a little bit before we started recording. For me, if I haven't checked into the base beer, the OG, the barrel-aged narwhal without a year on it, that's always the first one I check into. Yep. Do you have a particular set of rules you go by for stuff like that?
Yeah, I do. Or if it's like if I drink the beer the year it was released, so like I'm drinking barrel aged, the 2020 version of barrel aged narwhal, I'll just check into barrel aged narwhal, knowing that my check-in's going to have a date on it and all that stuff. I'll be able to see. If I was to check into like the 2018 barrel aged narwhal today, then I would select that variant, knowing that that's going to be the only way for me to know, unless I noted in the check-in notes what year that beer is was released that I'm actually consuming. So if it's the same year it was released, regular check-in to kind of not a variant. But if I'm drinking something from the past, yep, definitely grabbing that year's specific beer and checking into that one. That's kind of my like loose set of rules there.
I think that makes logical sense. I always try and avoid checking into the quote unquote wrong beer on Untappd. And in a situation like this, especially with ageable beers or beers that are released every year, you'll see that even on the label, sometimes the 2016 version. So checking into or choosing which way you check in, there's no right or wrong, but hopefully it serves you well.
Yeah.
As you check into your beers and go back to reference them. So this will be a case where I want to leave a very kind of real beer review on my check-in if I know I'm going to come back to it in a year and kind of compare those tasting notes.
True.
So talking about sitting on one of these cans for a year, sitting on is the term I use for just waiting to drink a beer. A couple of questions, Harrison, and just kind of looking around the Drinking Socially Facebook group or some questions that people have asked me over the years about cellaring your beers, especially if you're kind of new to craft beer or new to the hobby. Some of the questions in no particular order I just want to run by with you, Harrison.
Yeah.
What would be initially this beer is in a can this year. So I find that exciting. What's the big difference in cellaring something in a bottle versus a can?
Sure. Yeah. So there's a really kind of a common misconception out there, although I feel like maybe not so much anymore, where like when a beer becomes skunked, goes bad when it goes from being hot to cold, back and forth again and again, and that somehow ruins the beer. In reality, during the brewing process, you're constantly doing that in the cellar. You're dropping temperatures, you're raising them, you're dropping them again for various reasons. So temperature, while important, is not nearly as scary or is detrimental to a beer as light. Light is really the number one thing, and oxygen you want to keep out of the beer. And we'll talk about oxygen though. With an asterisk in a little bit. But yeah, so can, obviously, it's like a keg. It's sealed off completely. So you're not going to have to worry at all about any kind of light getting in there and breaking down any of the flavors, the quality, any of that stuff, which is, yeah, it's great. I mean, that's awesome to have essentially a small keg you can put in your fridge and not have to, that's one thing you won't have to worry about. So I'm also excited that it's in a can this year. I think I wish I could have both, like a bottle and a can of the same year and do that whole comparison. no such luck, but definitely pro can in this, and not worry about metallic off flavors, things like that. That's just not something you don't really need to worry about. Oftentimes, if that's something you're concerned about, it comes from drinking it from the can, and you're kind of like smelling the can to shrink it, and you're tricking yourself into thinking there's some kind of metallic taste in the beer when it's just you also smell the can.
Pour it into a glass.
Pour it into a glass.
You mentioned, so if light is one of the supervillains of beer aging, the can is a perfect hero to that enemy.
Yeah.
You mentioned a couple other things. I'm going to jump onto temperature next.
Right.
Is there a perfect temperature? Is there a sweet spot, or is there a big difference if I age my beer in the closet versus in a fridge all year? Is there what's the big difference in that?
Yeah. So that's a really good thing to talk about. And keep in mind, like, you don't need to lose your mind about selling your beer. Is like John has his beer is in a closet. I have mine in a cupboard in the dark, standing upright in a place that I know it doesn't get too hot or too cold, and I'm great with that now. And I'm not thinking about it or worried about it. Now, if you want to kind of take it to that next level and talk about cellaring, temperature is usually around like 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit is like that sweet spot, something cool, not cold. You don't really want to keep your beer, if you're cellaring it, in a refrigerator. Refrigerators are designed to keep food dry and keep moisture out. And if you have something like a beer that's corked and caged, you may run into drying out the outside of that cork. The inside of it that's actually touching or facing the beer has its own humidity, so it won't really be impacted too much by that, but you could still run into issues if that cork is not great, or it's an older beer, things like that. So don't want to keep it cold. And then hot, yes. The warmer it gets, the faster the aging process is kind of going to come into effect. So you don't want it to be warm either. If you can, but again, basements are great. Attics, not so much. Basement would be better. Cupboard, yeah, somewhere dark, somewhere that keeps constant temperature. We really kind of, it's funny, it makes sense that homebrewing rules, like when you're starting out and you don't have tons of equipment, they usually tell you like find a closet in the inside of your house, the one that's like not touching an outside wall to put your beer into, knowing that you could see more fluctuation in temperature if you're up against an exterior wall during the summer or the spring when it's cold in the night and warm in the day. That's stuff you want to kind of avoid. But yeah, I think like I had mine forever in the top of an attic, or a top of a cupboard rather. I had one in the basement for a while, and now I'm behind a couch. So yeah, 50, 55 you can, but really just try to keep it constant and don't let it get too warm.
I think that's really cool advice. It makes it possible for anybody to try this hobby. Don't let it get too warm, or it'll go too fast. Don't let it get too cold, or it'll go too slow. Mm-hmm. And mainly try and avoid that fluctuation. Try and keep it in a medium balanced spot, just like a good beer.
Exactly.
So a couple other on the high levels, you mentioned oxygen, and I think this is kind of this may be out of some of our hands. But if I had to ask you a question pointed at oxygen in beer storage, like cans, regular cap bottles, cork and cage bottles, is there a way to mitigate the damage that oxygen will do to my beer as I'm cellaring?
Sure. And so to be clear, this is like a Trojan horse scenario. A lot of the times with oxygen, people think like maybe I'll have a bad cork or the cap won't be sealed well, and that's how the oxygen gets in. The oxygen's already in there. Every beer you drink has what's called dissolved oxygen in it, which we refer to as just DO in the industry. And you want to keep that as a brewery like below 500 parts per million, 300, 200. So keep that low as possible, because as that beer ages, or if it gets too warm, that oxygen will leave the liquid and sit on top of the beer inside the bottle still and start to impart some of those kind of cardboard-like off flavors oxygen can impart on a beer. Now, something we haven't mentioned yet, which plays into effect here, is that really when you're cellaring beer is a nice kind of ballpark to on the ABV side to look at is things that are above 7%. And when you talk about beers like Imperial Stouts that are like 12% or 10% or higher, a lot of that can protect the flavors from some of the off flavors that oxygen imparts, which is mostly wet cardboard is what you get there. If you're lower than that, though, it'll probably be more pronounced. So it seems to be easier to have a lower dissolved oxygen number in cans as well. At least we found that in canning, it was just easier. It just was easier. So that's also the reason why I'm excited about this. It really is a great vessel, the can itself. But yeah, oxygen, it's in the beer already. It always is. And you want to kind of keep that in the beer as long as possible. Being cool will help it stay in the liquid.
That's phenomenal. And if you're listening to this to learn, even if you're me, you're going to go back and replay Harrison's answer like 3 times just to capture all that info. But most of the oxygen that we battle when we're cellaring beer already exists in the beer.
Right.
So ABV is a good, and that was something I'm glad you brought up. Higher, greater than 7% is a safer thing to age than less than 7%.
Yeah.
Mostly, here's the last question I want to ask you on cellaring, Harrison. 25% of every beer is yeast. Is there a big difference in me cellaring a stout like this narwhal versus a wild ale or something with Brett? Or is there a difference in the way that yeast is going to change the beer? I would assume yes, but can you help me understand what the difference in aging a sour versus a stout is going to do for me?
Sure. And sours in particular, and Brettanomyces in particular, it's always kind of this number of 18 months is always thrown around when you're talking about Brett beer. It's like that seems to be a sweet spot 18 months after it's been bottled, as long as there's still some actual yeast in that bottle. Seems to be doing something a little magical there. And that's not hard and fast, and each beer is different, but I've heard that again and again. Don't really know why. I guess it's just kind of long enough, not too long. That just seems to work out for that yeast where it's not turning it to apple cider vinegary or horsey or whatever. Wild ales are tough. Spontaneously fermented things are tough to predict once they're in the bottle, because that yeast really will react way more to temperature changes and to light than if there wasn't any yeast in there still. But that also makes them really exciting. And those are my favorite kind of beers to age, are the ones that still have yeast in them, because it will change over time. And we've spoken about before, but that was one of my favorite parts of using Beer Advocate, is that you could get on there and type in the beer you had, and there'd be thinking about drinking it, and there'd be a forum in there, people saying like, yeah, guys, it's great right now. Now's the time to drink it. If you have, Rodenbach's Grand Cru from 2007, open it up. It's going to knock your socks off. And so you could find that and be like, oh, I do have one of those, and jump on it and enjoy it. So when there's yeast in the beer, it's going to change more, or it could change more than if there isn't. That being said, like, again, that's not the only factor here. I mean, when you're talking about aging and cellaring beers, a lot of things are going to change. Overall bitterness and the kind of it's going to decrease. Well, same with like fruity or floral esters. If that's something if you have a Belgian beer, that's expected. Those things will start to go down. Spices seem to start to increase to a point, and then also plateau. Oxidization, so that kind of wet paper and cardboard, that can go up. The bready, sweety, malty things can go up too. So like think toffee or honey or things like that. Even like earthy flavors, which may come out of here too. Same with wood. The wood stuff seems to increase over time as well. So there's a lot of stuff that goes up and down with beers that don't have yeast in them too, just based on time and how that the flavors are interacting with each other, and which ones are kind of coming to the forefront and which ones are starting to back off. So it's always fun. You never know But Beer Advocate was a great resource where you could, at any moment, type in the beer you had if you were thinking about pulling it out and see recently who had it and if it was ready yet or not.
That's actually one thing that happens to me often on Untappd as well. Less of a paragraph or so in the beer review, but it always amazes me when I check in a 5-year-old beer on Untappd and someone checked it in a day ago or 20 minutes ago. Those of you that have listened through the cellaring guide from Harrison, re-listen to it, but a recap would be 7% or more ABV. Keep it at a moderate temperature. Cans are better than bottles because light is the bad guy, and everything else is science with a little bit of magic and darkness. So the ultimate advice, I think the best advice I could ever get or give for cellaring is buy 2, drink 1 today, save 1 for next year, so you have something to compare it with.
Right.
And send Harrison a Facebook message and tell him that we want to do an episode on off flavors as well. Because I think we got close there, but that would be beneficial. And speaking of sending Harrison a message on Facebook, let's cut in for a quick social media update while we're all here together. There's been a couple of cool things that have been happening in the Drinking Socially group on Facebook. We've gotten a lot of new members. Some of it's because of the badge. Some of it's because of all the Untappd live events. But the group is one of my favorite places to exist on Facebook. And just some highlights. First off, big shout out to Alexander Gates. He actually made an Untappd quiz and shared it with the Facebook group. And then I shared it with Untappd. It's a quiz on historical Untappd badges. And it is remarkably difficult. So I'm not going to share my results. I'm not going to ask Harrison to share his, but Alexander put together a great quiz on there. A couple other posts, more recently, Michael McKenna on Facebook. He didn't know we were recording this episode, but he just recently shared a picture of an 11-year-old Dogfish Head 120 minutes. That's probably the beer that introduced cellaring to me, or something with a real high ABV. Yeah. He remarked that it did have some brown sediment in there and wishes he would have got to it maybe 3 or 4 years earlier. But that's the nature, I think, of cellaring. Yep. Mike, thanks for sharing the picture with us. You get about 50 or so likes on there, a couple of people asking questions. You don't know what's going to happen, but it's a way for you to change a beer doing literally nothing. Another post that caught my eye, Andrea Moore. This is hopefully something no one can relate to, but she shared a post, beautiful pour of Bourbon County from Goose Island. She said after almost a year of remodeling her house, she finally listed it for sale, ready to get out of there and finish being in a remodel. But what a celebratory, drinking a Bourbon County beer. Awesome. There's nothing wrong with that. That beer is always kind of impressive. Yep. And then the final update from the Facebook group comes from Ryan Anderson, who kind of posed a question to the group. And this is where I want to ask Harrison as well. His question verbatim: do you guys post a picture of the beer that you're drinking to prove that you really checked that one in? If so, I have more pictures of beer than I do on my Instagram. I agree. I think I always take a picture of the beer for my check-in. On Instagram, I barely exist. I share some photos. I mainly am on Instagram to see what other people are doing or what's cool now. Aside from my 37 years in learning Instagram more and more every day, Untappd's a great excuse for me to take a picture. They're never good, but I subscribe to that. I take a picture of my check-ins, if anything, so that I know. Maybe someone might call me out on it, but mainly so that I know where I was when I drank that beer and did I actually tag the right one. Harrison, do you do this? Do you find yourself falling victim to that as well, or do you take pictures for a different reason?
I mostly take pictures of my dogs, which is because they're always doing something silly like sleeping or whatever. I don't know. They're always there next to me. I try to, especially, the can art's gotten me excited, or it's a beer I'm really excited about. I probably go through like waves of it where even waves within a night where if I'm having 3 or 4 beers, the first 2 may get pictures of the can and the pour. The next 2 beers might be dog pictures, and then we'll move along. So yeah,
maybe a different reason for that, but either.
That's right. I'll put a silly hat on them, and then as the night goes on, takes on a whole new, experience in and of itself. But so I don't have like a something I always do. I'm mindful of it, and I like taking pictures of something as opposed to not taking a picture. I do find myself thinking like, oh, I wish I didn't drink that beer that fast, so I had something to take a picture of, or I wish I had something noteworthy that I was near to share this moment with, because I think that does help. It's fun, obviously pictures are powerful. Even if it's just a dog sleeping in a chair, you can look back years later and go, oh, that's right, we had that horrible picture on that wall. Why did we have that? Who bought that? My goodness. And then you kind of, are some laughs are rekindled. So I try to always take a photo. It's sometimes of the beer, but mostly of the dogs.
I totally agree. I think Untappd is very forgiving on the pictures you take. David Metzen comments on Ryan's original post and says, you have to make sure your pictures on Instagram are really pretty. It doesn't matter on Untappd, just take a picture. Yep. And I agree, and I love that about Untappd. Yep. Sometimes I'm checking in and I've already drank the whole beer, so there's not much to take a photo of. Sometimes it's, if I was drinking 3 narwhals tonight, I don't know what kind of crazy contest I would be in, but on my second check-in, I probably wouldn't even take a picture. Yeah. I would just check it in to remember what the heck I was doing.
Yep.
That's awesome. But the Facebook group is an amazing resource. There's a lot of people, obviously, we brag about our badges and our check-ins and our beers, but it's become so much of a bigger group in the year 2020. And I love that the community is a very positive place to hang out and talk about beer and learn about beer and share some of the things that's going well for you and beer in your city. It's a positive group, and I love that about the many members that have grown up in there.
Yeah.
And kind of on the tune of social media, let's cover something a little bit more broad spectrum. Harrison, what do we have coming up in terms of Untappd for social media and the company as a whole?
Yeah, so if you've been following along, and I hope you have, with Untappd social media, you've seen the phrase or the image or heard talk about Untappd TV, and it's really something John and I are a part of, really focused on, as well as Greg, the co-founder of Untappd, and the team here to take some time to talk to some of these industry leaders and cool, interesting people that kind of cross paths with Untappd and beer and have them share their stories. We've been doing that right now twice a week with virtual happy hours every Thursday at 7 Eastern time, and then sessionable Saturdays at 2:30 Eastern every Saturday, where we have different guests each week. And just had Garrett Oliver on from Brooklyn Brewery. And actually, he helped produce the beer John's going to have in a couple of minutes in part 2 of the episode. Greg Cook from Stone is coming up on May 9th, which will be a blast. Obviously a trailblazer and someone who has, tons of great stories. So that's what I'm looking forward to. And then tomorrow, May 7th, if you listen to this the day that came out, M. Souter, who created pintsandpanels.com, which is a really cool site where she talks about beers and has kind of beer education comics that she illustrates and illustrates some of the reviews of the beers she's had. It's a blast to take a look at. If you haven't, pintsandpanels.com, check it out. She'll be on with Untappd's own Rob Brink, and Rob is the man behind so many of the kind of great things you think about when you think about Untappd. A lot of the images, design of the app itself. He made the Drinking Socially badge. He made a lot of my favorite badges. So Rob's awesome and has a pretty cool story too. So he's going to be on tomorrow, May 7th, kind of just giving us the download on all the cool stuff we're working on and at Untappd here on the design side of things. And, you don't need to keep tuning to this section of the podcast to hear about Untappd TV. You can just go there whenever you want. I mean, there's new segments all the time, untappd.tv. That's all you need to remember. And you can watch it live there. It'll be live in the app across a bunch of our social media. It's really kind of amazing what we're doing. I think it's pretty cool from someone who is behind the scenes, just seeing where we go next and what we're doing and the conversations we're able to have.
I couldn't agree more. It's been amazing to see, for so long kind of working in the industry and see Sam Calagione on Untappd.tv talking to Greg about projects that Dogfish Head's doing and Greg Cook coming up this weekend. So it's been really cool. Big secondary shout out to Rob Brink. Mm-hmm. The Drinking Socially badge is beautiful. Thanks for all the awesome work you do making Untappd a more pretty place to look at. Even though my check-in photos will never live up to your standards. We're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsor, but stay tuned. When we come back, we've got Jenn from Tales from the Cask. Jenn's got a huge amount of information about the beer, the brewing industry, what happens kind of behind the scenes. And she's going to pull a beer out of her cellar, and we're all going to drink some beers that we've all been sitting on for the last couple of years. So stay tuned for part 2 of the episode, and look forward to catching up with you in just a second. Want to show off your love of Untappd? Check out our online store and pick up Untappd branded glassware, shirts, sweatshirts, hats, more. Depending on how hot or cold you are, go to store.untappd.com and enter the coupon code podcast when you check out. That'll get 20% off anything you order. That's store.untappd.com. Use the coupon code podcast, 20% off for you. Plus, it lets them know that you guys are listening, and we love that here. All right, we're back for part 2 of Drinking Socially, and I'm excited to introduce Jenn Balak to the show. She was a longtime co-host on Tales from the Cask, which is another podcast you can find. We'll put the links to it in the show notes, or just go to talesfromthecask.com. When she wasn't busy with that, she was also the beer kind of brand and marketing manager for a distributor here in North Carolina. So Jenn, welcome to the show. We're going to ask you a couple of questions, but I'm really excited to also drink a beer with you.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. I'm excited to be here.
So a couple of questions that Harrison and I had that we'd love for you just to kind of share with the listeners. When you began, so Tales from the Cask, awesome show. If you haven't listened to it, check it out. When you kind of set out to produce or build that show, what was kind of your initial goal to help teach people about beer, or what was the goal of it?
Sure. So my, is actually, I knew what podcasts were, but I was not a huge podcast listener. We started the show back in 2013. And actually 2 of my coworkers, our CEO had the idea that maybe we could reach some of our customers or just beer enthusiasts in a different way. And we started listening to a bunch of podcasts and kind of seeing what different, angles people were taking on craft beer. And we felt there was a need maybe for something that was just very approachable, educational. Yes, we drank a lot of cool and different beers, but we also tried to try some of more mainstream stuff, just so it was very inclusive. Our first episode, we were trying to originally plan things around one hop each episode, which lasted exactly one episode.
I love it. I love the idea.
So our first episode was actually EKGs. So we did East Kent Golding hops. And it was, we really thought we did a lot of research into it. During the first season, I guess, if you will, of the show, both my coworker and I were studying for the Certified Cicerone exam. So it was a good kind of review and helped us, study, because we're going through all these different styles of beer, talking about the attributes and whatnot. So we kind of pivoted from that. It got a little more, I guess, informal. And once kind of all of our personalities started to mesh, and we came up with all kinds of different off the wall ideas of episodes, and it kind of just became what it was. We really enjoyed doing some industry news stuff too, which I think was helpful for some of the listeners if they are into beer but maybe aren't reading the industry blogs, as you guys are probably doing. And we were, I think, just keeping it lighthearted, and people seem to like it.
I love that you kind of took us from inception to evolution in one explanation. And I think, Harrison, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's really easy to fall in love with an idea like an episode about hops. It's really difficult to keep up with it, as we learned so many times over again. But nothing will make you learn more than doing a podcast about something. I couldn't agree more. We're always trying to stay up on the next thing. You did kind of reference early on when you were creating the show some coworkers, and can you kind of tell us then, this is when you were working at a distributor as well, or I guess technically a beer or alcohol distributor?
Yes. So I worked for a distributor, a pretty large distributor in central North Carolina. We did cover the whole state, but our core market was the Triangle area, which for listeners that are not from NC, that's kind of where all the colleges with the basketball.
Accurate. Yeah.
The Tar Heels and NC State and Duke, all in that area. So we covered that area, and I worked there for almost 15 years and had several different roles there. But my last role was the brand marketing director. So worked primarily with all the suppliers, all the breweries. I was their main point of contact. I dealt with a lot of the ordering and sales reporting, anything that a brewery needed to know what was going on. I was typically the person that they would reach out to.
That sounds way more detailed or involved than I would have initially. You're not just sitting around drinking beer all day.
No, that's a common misconception. But yes, we did get to drink a lot of beer. I will say, the more that craft beer grew in this area, the more the podcast was important to me and to my co-hosts, because we had a year, I want to say a couple years ago, where we realized, looking back on it, we had brought in 800 different keg SKUs or items. So there's no way you can try 800 different new beers that come into your building and you're supposed to be selling them. So having the podcast was a great outlet to, have that excuse to, hey, let's sit down and try 3 beers and talk about them. And now we are able to, oh yeah, I did get to try that release from whomever. And we didn't limit ourselves to just our beers. We definitely tried the gamut, local, national, international. It was not just the beers that we were selling.
I love that story. And I can echo the difficulty of trying 800 beers per year. Although I know there's some Untappd users listening that are like, nope, I could do that in a half a year.
Right.
Especially those of you in Moscow.
Right.
But I think that's important. And I appreciate that it wasn't just the beers you distributed. Without getting too granular, because we've got some awesome beers to pull out of our respective cellars. But one final question, Jenn, before we dive in. You'd mentioned drinking some of your beers and some of the beers that weren't yours. And from a distributor standpoint, can you explain really quickly, especially for those listeners that are overseas, kind of how that works, or how you guys get a brewery to work with you?
Sure, absolutely. So beer laws in the U.S. are very complicated, so I won't get too involved with that. But essentially, we're on the 3-tier system, which happened after Prohibition. So that means breweries have to sell to a wholesaler, who then sells to the retailer. Overseas, there are still tied houses where you go to a bar. I've been to plenty of them, and they have one brewery's beer, which is awesome. That is not necessarily allowed in the system we have in place. There are state-by-state rules on self-distribution, where a brewery can, up to a certain amount, sell beer directly to bars and restaurants. But for us, what would happen is, if a brewery wanted to come into the state, we would set up a contract with them. And then at that point, you have county by county rights to sell that product. So for the distributor I worked with, some products we would have distribution rights for just the 9 counties in central North Carolina. some products like the beer that actually I'm going to open in a few minutes, we had the entire state. So we were able to sell across the state. Other distributors would fit in those other counties. So if that makes sense, essentially you have the rights to a certain brand. So if you're in the county where you have those rights, every single place that you see that beer for sale, whether it's a restaurant, a convenience store, a bar, Target, anywhere, that is coming from that distributor.
Holy cow. Okay, so the back office of beer just got a lot more spreadsheety, or I'm thinking of like the mailroom with ropes connecting everything. But thank you, Jenn, for giving that description. I think it's, if anything, it's important just to kind of know when we're fortunate enough to be checking in and drinking all these beers, kind of the story, not just about how they got created, but how they found their way to your bar, bottle shop, town, gas station, whatever. Mm-hmm. I'm going to take a break from talking and take the interrogation light off of Jenn. We've got 3 old and amazing beers on the docket. Harrison, will you take us through kind of how we decided on these, or where they came from, or just get to the point where we can open some of these?
Right. I think we should. Sure, I'll do that quickly. But yeah, then we should pop them open and kind of go around and say what we all have, and then start drinking them. But yeah, just as we kind of talked about earlier in the podcast, John and I, and now Jenn as well, we pulled some stuff out of our cellars. It was, podcaster's choice. Beyond that, there wasn't much rhyme or reason to it. We kind of picked something we all wanted an excuse to drink and grabbed it today. Some of us may have some stories behind it. But really, I'm just kind of excited to see what happens next. We kind of talked about earlier, it's, at this point, you don't know. This beer has been around, the one that I have, for about 6 years. You don't know if it's good, bad, great, weird, different until you open it. So this is kind of this Christmas morning feeling of what's about to happen next. So I want to get to it, but let's start, I guess. Yeah, and go ahead and we'll start with Jenn. You can tell us what you have, and go to John, and we'll start cracking these things open.
That's what I was looking for, Harrison. Thanks for assigning order. Jenn, you might have the most exciting beer, but I'm excited to hear about it instead of just read about it.
All right. Well, first of all, talking about cellaring, I know you guys dove into it pretty hard the first part of the episode, but my cellar is kind of not organized at all. But, I've been lucky enough, I guess, that I've had a lot of relationships with breweries over the years. So I have acquired a decent amount of stuff. And, I flipped through a few things and was debating, do I keep it local? Do I go like really crazy and off the wall? And I thought the one that I landed on would be fairly well known, but still kind of a fun one. So I went with the AleSmith Barrel Aged Wee Heavy, and this is from 2014. AleSmith, San Diego brewery. They're very, very, very well known for their barrel aged beers. Speedway Stout is probably
incredible.
I would imagine the most checked in from that brewery on Untappd. And the barrel aged versions, they do a lot of different variants, which are very highly anticipated. But we're going to do the Wee Heavy today, which Wee Heavy, also known as a Scotch ale, kind of the highest on the ranking of the, you've got your 60 shilling, your 70 shilling, and then your export and your heavier Scottish beers are the ones we know in the U.S. This actually falls into the 120 shilling, I believe.
Yep.
So the highest version of the Scottish ales. And I did want to mention this one is not cork and caged. They have this really nice thick aluminum foil basically on the top. And I remember talking to the owner of the brewery, Peter Zion, and he said people would try and switch out the day when they all had to go around because they all hand crimped them all just with their hands. And I guess you do that a bunch of times.
Right.
It's not very fun.
Yeah, don't let that be your day. No way.
And sometimes it's a lot easier than peeling the wax off of a wax sealed.
Right, or the waxing day.
I did dive into, or I did open the foil because I couldn't remember if this is one of the sneaky ones where it has the pop top, but then also the cork. So I was
smart.
Making sure I wasn't going to need a wine key, which probably would have resulted in me just opening it before we got started.
Also smart. I won't lie and say that Harrison and I have had to do that a few times.
Mm-hmm.
That pours out nice, though.
Yeah, it really, it's still got a pretty nice head to it. It's a nice kind of caramel colored head. Ooh, it definitely has that, plum kind of raisin stone fruit smell to it. Oh man, it's I don't know, no oxidation that I can detect. So obviously that's one of the main culprits of cellaring is oxidation or that papery kind of smell. But this is, I don't know, it's tasting pretty rich. It's definitely got that. This beer, I've had a couple iterations of it, and one of them was a port barrel aged version.
Yes.
And to me, this has kind of a port character to it already. So I can imagine the port, it goes extremely well with it. This is a bourbon barrel aged. But yeah, AleSmith is great at doing the kind of sneaky, this is a 10% beer. I could probably just sit here and drink it with no problems. It doesn't have it's definitely mellowed out. It doesn't have a lot of the booziness, which is, I would say, a benefit of cellaring a high ABV beer, not having that really, heavy alcohol flavor. So I'm calling this a winner.
Cool. That's great.
And it's 6 years old. I think anytime you open a beer that old and it's not bad, that's for me, that's my standard of what are winners.
Right. Sure. Yeah, that's an easy one.
Yeah, it's still good beer.
Still good. All right. John, what are you working with? What do you got? And I'm excited about this one too.
Yeah, so this one is a favorite of mine from Brooklyn Brewery. We just had Garrett on the Sessionable Saturdays with Greg this last Saturday. So it made me think of this beer that I've been saving for a little while. And honestly, in this particular beer's case, I've been saving it just because it's in such a big bottle. Mm-hmm. So it was cellared by mandate more than anything else. It's 11.5% Brooklyn's Black Ops. It's been released year over year for at least 10 years, if not more. I like that they'll actually put the bottled on date right on the label. My dogs, however, dislike the fact that it's a cork and cage. So we'll hear how live this one is here in a second. Yep.
Ooh,
yep.
Great.
That's beautiful for this one's a 2017. I should have introduced. So 3 years in the bottle, 3 years on my bookcase. This is such a beautiful bottle. I left it out it got a little bit of lights. I know Harrison talked about that as a bad guy. So we'll see how poorly I've done with this one, but it's pouring out better than I expected. This is a bottle re-fermented beer. Mm-hmm. Which usually makes me feel a little bit more comfortable sitting on it.
Yeah, for sure. Oh boy.
Ooh, the nose is more licoricey than I remember it being when I've drank this fresh before, but maybe that's a nice addition.
Yeah, get in there.
Oh, this is so good. Nope. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this beer. If you can get it and drink it fresh, it's delicious. If you can get it and save it for 3 years, it turns a little bit more, this is incorrect, but a little bit more pudding-like in the, it's just kind of, it's bottled at 70 IBU, which I know we covered in our Russian Imperial on how sometimes a stout can be bitter different than an IPA. But 3 years later, most of that bitterness is just gone, and it went from kind of like a baking chocolate into more of a Hershey's chocolate. Pardon me for the reference, but this is absolutely stunning. I'm excited to keep drinking along with the three of you, and also excited to see what do you got over there, Harrison?
Yeah, so I'm going to jump right into mine as well. So I chose something from 2014 as well, a Big Bad Baptist from Epic Brewing out of Utah, and they do some really cool stuff with how they catalog their beers. This is technically release number 33, and that's labeled on the side of the bottle, and it says visit epicbrewing.com for more info. So I did, and they have a really detailed system. They don't release this beer yearly, so all it is a 2014 release. It's not the only beer, the only big Bad Baptist they released that year. So they do it just by release number. And when you click on the release number on the website, it tells you all about that specific beer, when it was brewed. They have a couple different brewery sites, so which brewery actually brewed it, what's in this version, because Big Bad Baptist is a little bit different each time they make it, to kind of highlight the hops they used, especially stuff. They have some Novo coffee and cacao nibs in here as well, which is really neat. But I thought it was a really great way to do it, where you, instead of wondering about what is in this beer and what makes it different, you can just go right to the website and it's all cataloged out. So that was exciting for me, and really kind of shows you they are very well aware of people cellaring their beers, and they have a little system in place for it where you could put it in your closet and forget about it and everything about it, and then log online and refresh yourself when you actually want to drink it. So I'm going to pop the top. Ooh, yes. And there's some CO2 in there as well. So that's always the first thing I look for and hope for. Ooh, wow. And it definitely, there's a bunch of bourbon kind of caramely notes jumping right out at me. Let me get this a little vigorous in the pour, get some, free the aromas. Ooh,
I like how everyone's drinking out of kind of a normal size glass too.
Yeah, that was kind of a conscious decision. I wanted it to just I didn't want to trap anything. I want to get the aroma kind of cruising right away, at least to start. Wow. So a lot of coffee, a lot of like espresso. Ooh, that is fantastic. But it doesn't have that bitterness. It's just like the coffee up front. And then the wood is coming a little bit more. This is bourbon barrel aged. Those oak kind of, it's less vanilla. It's more of, well, I guess I'm getting vanilla espresso happening right now. I'm excited for this to kind of sit for a couple of minutes too, of course. It's been hanging out in that bottle for a long, long time. So I want to get it out into the world and let it do its little dance.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, though, what it is.
I'm definitely just having opened mine a couple minutes ago. Now it's a little bit warmer in the glass and a little more opened up. I'm getting more nuttiness and a little
right. That's wild. That's so funny. That's what I was just thinking too. Is that I just had I'm a big mixed nut guy. That's kind of my go-to snack, and this is reminding me of the handful of cashews and pecans and stuff I had not too long ago. Where it is that right, there's something about that. Kind of, it's a nutty, even though we're totally different beers, I'm getting the same notes right here. That's a great, wow. And the head is just like a velvety, this is amazing.
I'm just watching Harrison sway this beer back and forth.
Via video. Really has nice head retention. Mine's kind of,
I know, wanted to get
I can swirl back.
Mm-hmm.
So with you guys, your beers are twice as old as mine. I'm super impressed, especially hearing Harrison pop the cap on his, how much CO2 was left in there.
Oh, it's great.
And drinking them, I want to drink them. So I'm already sad that I'm not there tasting them with you.
I know this would have been a perfect episode to not be.
I know, right?
Social distancing.
Cool. That would have been amazing. We would have to have some cheese and some smoked meats and some other things to help us kind of cut through the density of these beers, but that would have been even more fun.
The one drawback to a cellared bottle share is I think everything's always greater than 9 or 10%.
Right. It gets massive fast.
And it's usually stouts as well. So there's not much relief coming.
Right.
I noticed the three of us effectively brought a stout to the party tonight. Is there, for you, Harrison, and you, Jen, is there a reason you think people generally try and put a stout on the shelf as opposed to many other styles?
For the cellar?
Yep.
Yeah, so for me, it really, we kind of talked about this earlier, but the imperial stouts lend themselves to that, being higher in ABV. That's step number one, is you want something that's going to be a little higher in alcohol. And also, as he spoke about on the Rush Imperial Stout episode, the reason a lot of these imperial stouts are so hopped is, that's true to the style. Hops are a preservative they make beer last longer, but it can be kind of harsh and intense if you're drinking a 70 or 100 IBU stout fresh, to let that kind of the bitterness die off and let the other kind of floral or earthy characteristics of those hops still hang around with time. I think it benefits the stout itself. So those are kind of my two highlights for why stouts I think age well. They're complex, and they do have those flavors, like especially if it's barrel aged, where the wood should start to be a little more pronounced over time. Some of like the heat from the booze, as Jenn said, that's going to go away, and it's going to allow other flavors to kind of come to the forefront. But as you kind of said a couple of times tonight, it's nice to have a comparison beer, to have, a newer one, an older one, to do verticals. I mean, that's where things get really exciting when you have a beer from this year and last year and 2 years ago, to see what that same beer does, what time does to it. That's always a great learning experience, and I'm sure we'll do one eventually. But stouts overall, I mean, I think they just lend themselves to age because they're going to change a lot. What about you, Jenn?
Yeah, I was going to say that would be the number one thing, would be to, try something fresh or as soon as it's released, and then see how it changes over time. And as you mentioned, the stouts and, the darker, heavier beers tend to pick up more of that barrel characteristic, or they might change. Maybe they were very vanilla forward and some of that has died off, and maybe you're getting that nuttiness or that more raisiny characteristic a little bit later as they've been sitting. What I've noticed that's been pretty cool in the market recently is some breweries are releasing something that they would typically have done in the 750 or 22 ounce format in a 4-pack. And at that point, you've got your four beers, and they're still the same fantastic beers, but you're able to try, one or two now, or try one now, and then try one next year, and one the year after that, one the year after that. That also, to John's point, that kind of diminishes the cellaring for only the reason that you don't have anybody to drink it with, because at that point you can open that 12 ounce beer. So I know there's been a couple breweries that have switched to that format, and I think that's been really well received.
I couldn't agree more. I think any of the breweries that are making me a 12% stout, but also allowing me to drink it alone, they're my heroes right now. And your 4-pack idea, Jenn, is brilliant. Buy a 4-pack of Harrison and I just drank barrel aged narwhal, and it came in a 4-pack, so it kind of sets you up to start cellaring if you want to jump down that road. Something you alluded to earlier, Jenn, you were talking about when you were a distributor and AleSmith was coming to North Carolina. You had a kind of a story you were going to hint at there. You nailed it. Speedway Stout is their most checked in beer on Untappd. But if you haven't tried the Wee Heavy, hopefully this spurs you to check it out. But I'm really excited to hear the story you had, Jenn.
Yeah, so we when I was a distributor, we actually launched AleSmith in 2014. So shortly after this was released, and my our VP of sales is a huge Imperial Stout guy. So if he was just having a beer, he would have like every beer that we're having tonight just as his making dinner and eating dinner.
Wow.
He just loves, that's his style of beer, which is great. It's expensive habit, but so of course we're talking to AleSmith, and we're talking about what beers we're going to bring in for the launch, and he's like, well, you got to send the barrel aged Speedway Stout bottles. And they were like, well, we don't send those out, they don't leave the state, they don't, maybe they go to a festival, once a year or whatever. And he managed to convince them to send us just a few cases of this beer, the Wee Heavy, and then also the barrel aged Speedway Stout, which was a very hot ticket item, obviously, once we got launched and up and running with AleSmith, who makes fantastic IPAs, and they're in San Diego, so of course you've got that whole vibe going as well. But it was really cool that they were generous enough to let us grab a couple cases, and we sold a few of them right off, right out the gate with the launch. And then we actually held on to a couple of them and sold them maybe a year or so later. So that is how I came to have this bottle. Probably another just notable AleSmith beer that I had when I went out there in 2015. AleSmith actually sold their original brewery facility to Cellar, and so we went out there right during the transition of that. So AleSmith's tap room was still there, but Cellar was operating the brewery. So it was cool because we were walking through and they were playing like Danish rap music as they were brewing.
That's awesome.
So on that trip, we actually managed to snag a bottle, which has not lasted in my cellar. I had that a couple years ago, but it was the Beer Geek Speedway Stout collab.
Oh, man.
Definitely. I know on the one, like for a second, I was like, do I still have one of those? But that's long gone. But just another fun AleSmith story. If you're in the San Diego area or you visit, it's definitely worth visiting them and the old facility with McKellen.
Yeah, they made a beer in honor of Tony Gwynn's batting average. I think that alone puts them on my wish list.
They actually, in their new facility, which has a much larger tap room, I visited that, but it was not fully open yet when I was out there last, which has been open for several years now. I just haven't been back. But they have a Tony Gwynn museum that they actually run with his, family, and it's a whole foundation and everything. So it's supposed to be a really cool place because you've got great tasting room, a museum. Wow. They have a very, very awesome.
Harrison always talks about how brewing beer was such a difficult job.
I know, I sound like a liar now. That's great. I know. I love AleSmith. That's awesome.
One of the things I always like to check on, especially when I'm drinking an older beer, is I go to Untappd. And in a case like this, we kind of talked about it in part one of the show, but you can check into Brooklyn Black Ops without a year and it still counts as a check-in. I've had this beer before, so I'm going to check into the Brooklyn Black Ops 2017 version, which exists on Untappd, even though it's out of production. It amazes me that Dave just checked into this same beer about 10 days ago. Jeff just a couple days before him, Mike just before him. So I always find it really cool to see that, other people are kind of checking into theirs, and it's still well rated. Everybody seems to be giving it like a 4.5 stars. Have you guys seen anybody checking in the old beers that you guys brought as well?
Yeah, I saw somebody had checked in actually just I think on the 26th to this to my beer, the Barrel Aged Wee Heavy from AleSmith, but it was a 2012. So
holy cow!
Even even older version, and I think it kind of speaks to the fact that a lot of people are digging into the cellar in these.
Yes, that's a good point.
Time.
Yeah. Right. That's we've been talking about that again and again. Now's the time. If you have a huge cellar, this is why you did it. This is why you have it, to pull them out now and enjoy them. I found something similar. I looked at the number 33 release for Big Bad Baptist, and just about a month ago, David F. had one saying, digging deep in the cellar tonight, 2014 bottle holding up well, which is great. And then like a week before him, Norman had one too and rated it very highly. So, yep, just as Jen said, people are jumping into the cellar, and I'm not alone here in checking this beer recently, which is cool.
I know. Just when I was looking to, trying to figure out what I was going to drink on the show today, I found 2 other beers that I was like, oh, I'm putting these in the fridge. So I'll get to those. Those probably tomorrow.
Cool.
So sometimes you forget what you have until you start looking.
That's right.
So true. Harrison can attest to that. Right. He keeps it hidden behind the couch.
I have mine behind the couch. So I'm not tempted to dive in too early.
We got a question kind of recently, and since you guys brought it up, Robert from the Facebook group. Jen, are you in the Drinking Socially Facebook group?
I am.
I was hoping I'd catch her off guard.
No, I am. And my entry question was actually Brooklyn. So that's kind of
nice. Your first craft beer.
What's your first craft experience? I think something like that.
Yep.
I I went to college in New York City, so Brooklyn was kind of my first experience with not the macros and imports.
That's awesome. Maybe we'll throw Jenn proverbially under the bus later, and I'll organize a Q&A in the Facebook group for you guys that didn't get your questions answered. But
that's a good
Robert asked one earlier, and since we're we're not on the topic of staying at home, but since we're all staying at home while we're recording this, he asks, I've never really been much of a heavy drinker, but I find myself, having a glass of beer or whiskey almost every night now that we're all kind of quarantined at home. Or I say we're all, but in this case, the majority or a lot of people are quarantined at home or stuck at home. And Robert brings up a good point. Do you find yourself without having to leave to go to work or go get groceries, you find yourself drinking more, or is it kind of changed and you find yourself drinking less? I'll open it up and say that easily I'm drinking not more in volume, but more often. I don't have to drive home after work, so it's really easy to just open up a bottle at 5 o'clock or something. What about you, Jenn?
So I have been attempting to... I already, obviously working in the industry, was, probably a couple beer a day kind of person. I mean, it's, it's what we do. I have been trying to at least get myself to 5 or sometimes 4, but tried it. Usually if it's after 4, like 4:02,
right?
I'm like, okay,
in the clear.
I can have something now. But I think I'm with you on the, maybe not so much in volume, but earlier and more often.
Right.
Yeah, that's definitely. And, if you look at grocery stores and sales, I think the majority of people, at least in this area, are definitely with us.
Yep. Stocking up. Yeah. I'm in the same boat as you guys, probably drinking, probably almost every night, but having a beer or two and around 5. And that's been great right now. To drive home, that's kind of, your day is done when you walk away from your laptop. And that's my commute now, is the 5 feet from my laptop to my beer fridge. So I've set my desk up well. I will tell you though, what's kind of changed habit-wise is I used to be, my kind of standard was 2 times a week on the way home from work, stop by the local bottle shop, grab a 6-pack or so, and work through that until it was gone, and then go back and do that again. Now though, I'm buying with these delivery options, I'll buy a case at a time and really stock up. And so I kind of have a bottle shop in my house, which is amazing. So the routine is still there of, let me stop somewhere and grab a beer. The stop is already in my house. But I thought that was kind of interesting, where I'm stocking up on multiple of the same beer now, which I really don't usually do. There's so much to drink out there that sometimes I almost feel silly buying an entire 6-pack, which is not that much of a commitment. But now I've definitely kind of changed that tune a little bit, because it's just easier to get kind of more things at once, because of course I'm not going out nearly as often as I was. So that's been interesting.
I think the ABV thing too, for me at least, because I was used to, meeting people out for a beer at the end of the day. And, whether I was at a brewery or a beer bar, you're like, okay, well, I'm probably going to have 2. So I would never order probably the barrel-aged stout, because I knew I wanted to have something else.
Yep.
And, you're driving. So
right.
For me, I'm like, well, it's 5 o'clock. Maybe I'll have that barrel aged stout.
That's right.
Not going anywhere.
I love it. That's great.
I think I can agree. I've changed not just my habits, but what I drink. I drank through a whole 12-pack of the same beer, much to Harrison's point. That wasn't something I was always trying to grab. As Jenn kind of referenced, sometimes there can be 800 new brewery items or beer items from her distributor, and then there's 7 other ones in the same. It's impossible to keep up, but you always kind of tried to, or I always kind of tried to, and now I find myself going for that nostalgia, and I'm ready to drink a 12-pack of Sierra Nevada Pale Ale again, and every time I do, I realize how amazing those beers of yesterday are, if I can say that.
Well, they have the retro packaging, so
I know.
it is a beer of yesterday.
That's right. The 1980
Thanks for saving
packaging.
me. Yeah. One more question before we roll on to, I've got a would you rather geared up in relation to this episode. But before we move away from cellaring and drinking these beers as socially as we can, if you have one, great. If not, we'll get as close as we can. But one of the talking points I wanted to touch on is cellaring a beer that goes wrong. Whether it's within or without your control. Do you guys have an experience of a time you drank a beer that was maybe cellared in a bad way or too long or something like that, just so when it happens to everybody listening, they don't feel like they're the only ones to have made a mistake, because I have plenty of them.
Yeah, I'll jump in. You guys probably maybe touched on cellaring sours or something with wild yeast at the beginning of the show, and as maybe you've already talked about, the yeast can kind of ebb and flow on how active and inactive it is, and I think that can also be accelerated by warm temps. And I had a beer, which I will not name the brewery, but I was going to use it on a podcast. And I had grabbed it from the cellar and brought it upstairs. But then I went to work and I forgot about it. So I was like, oh, I have to go back and get this. So I go back. It's been sitting on my kitchen counter. It's North Carolina, so it's warm, it's sunny, it's humid. I picked the beer up. It was a cork and cage, and it exploded in like the fire hose, like around the kitchen.
Wow.
Yeah. Very, very violently. So that was probably my worst experience with the cellared beer. I tried to clean it up the best I could. I did not get to try the beer. But yes, it was even, a week later, I was just finding little, spots on the top of the microwave and like the back of the cabinet, and it just absolutely geysered on me. So that was probably hilarious if you were just watching it.
Right.
But,
if you would have had it on
so much fun to
TikTok.
clean up.
Yeah. Man. Oh gosh. Yep. That's that kind of beer too. Luckily it didn't happen in a brewery. That happened to us. That reminds me of a story when I was at Neshaminy Creek when we brewed a sour beer. We had put it in the fermenters, and we had a mixture of our kind of house blended yeast bugs we use for wild ales and spontaneously fermented stuff. And as it was being transferred one day, the seal on the racking port part of the tank came apart, and it just shot. It's pressurized, just shot all over, like an episode of Guts, just shot all over the floor like it was Nickelodeon slime in our cellar. And luckily we had really intense cleaning practices, so just covered the whole thing in Quat, which is like an intense industrial food grade cleaner, and had no problems with any other beer. But that nightmare of oh my God, this is beer spilling, and it's a scary beer you don't want to spill, all happening at once. Made for quite a lot of colorful language, and then quite a lot of cleaning very quickly, and got away unscathed. But at the moment, we were all kind of like, well, did we just destroy all the beer in the cellar by doing this? So glad that's in the past. Personally, though, I haven't had anything like that, Jen, where something blows up in my hand, thank goodness. But most of my bad stories come from human error, and really the one that comes to mind first was moving once, and had was late at night and packing all week and all that stuff. And through the last thing I think I packed was the Cellar, put in a box I put together. Next day I'm moving it and pick it up, and all the beers just fall at the bottom of the box because I had just poorly taped it, didn't double tape it, didn't grab from the bottom, whatever it was, and just and I lost probably 15 bottles. And I think I was I just had it up so high, and obviously a box in front of me. I just kind of felt like some vibrations and then heard glass shatter. I had no idea like what was going on until someone's like, yeah, don't look. And I like felt my socks wet, and I was like, no, all the beer has been destroyed. So that was a bummer, because that had been kind of probably the peak of my like cellaring, if you will, where almost every time I bought a beer, I bought another one. And that was one of the bigger boxes they were in. So never got to try a lot of beers that I had my sights set on. But again, that was in the past. That's why I keep cellaring, and just don't put it in a poorly constructed box. Just be better than I was. Learn from me.
There's not an easy way to follow that. I was just expecting like, oh, and it tasted horrible. But no, Jenn ruined her kitchen. Yeah. Harrison ruined a brewery and a box full of beers. The story that comes to mind for me was it happened during a hurricane, and we kind of had to start opening some of our cellared beers, because whenever a hurricane happens, you lose power and it's 95 degrees every day, even during the night. Those two things are a part of a hurricane. So right. I had just gone to the Answer Brew Pub in Richmond, Virginia, and I had some of their crowlers that had to stay cold. I had received my first Pliny the Elder from a accidental mail accident, and I had other like beers that I'd been cellaring, and here now like the temperature in the house is 94 degrees and everything's just going bad. So I looked at my wife and I said, we can throw these away, and that seems horrid, or we can drink them, kind of warm as they are, but that seems better than just throwing them away or letting them explode. So we started with the Answer beer, and as soon as we opened the crowler, it was like an explosion. But we did it outside, Jen, so that saved me that trouble. Pliny the Elder, really, really warm, was a terrible first experience. I didn't check it in, I didn't rate it. But the one that broke my heart the most was we had been saving Perfect Marriage Goose from Brewery Boont, if I remember correctly. It's probably yep.
The Mariage Parfait.
Yep.
Yeah. That's a fantastic beer.
It is under normal circumstances.
And it probably
it was like a 500 ml cork and cage. And I remember thinking, this one's fine. This is like, you can age this for 20 years. This is going to stand up. It's a perfect marriage. It'll get through some rough times. And it was early in my career of trying to like sours. And I remember drinking that one after the two other kind of poor experiences that I'd inflicted on myself, and just thinking like, oh man, I'm not going to like sours anymore. My wife and I are arguing because we're hot and there's no power and the marriages. There's so many implications on this beer, but those are different. Ultimately, if you're going to cellar beers for a long time, you'll run into some uncontrollable accidents. You'll taste things that probably weren't meant to be tasted in the beer, but that's kind of the fun behind it. You're experimenting, and science is taking over in that bottle. So don't expect everyone to turn out perfect, but the joy is when they do, which I think all three of us got a little lucky tonight.
Absolutely.
And that brings me to...
I think we had 3 winners tonight.
That's right.
The stars are aligned during this taping of Drinking Socially. And that brings me to a layup. Would you rather? I know we've done some before that are just really hard to answer. So this one is a little simpler. I'll put you on the spot to answer first, Jen, as is the now norm when we have a guest on the show. So would you rather, if I give you one beer, I've just opened John's Secret Brewery. We've only produced this one 12% stout, and it's got cool adjuncts in it, and it's got a wax sealed top, and I'm only giving you one of these beers. Would you rather drink it right now and experience it for what it is, or cellar it and hope that it gets better? And can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit?
So I think I would say I'm going to cellar it. And I think to me, part of the cellaring or the collecting beers or whatever you want to call it is it's also about the memories and the experiences that you had and where you got them. It was fun for me to talk about the stories from 5-6 years ago, with this beer that I tried today. And when I travel is when I tend to pick up beers for the cellar. And when you do open them, then you get to look back and, share those memories with other people. I wish I could have shared this beer with you guys today, but at least I could share the memories. And I think that's, for me, it's more of a gathering and remembering the times kind of memento situation, I guess. So yeah, I think I would probably cellar it, and then I could remember it's Harrison's awesome 12% beer from his brand new brewery. So right, yep. that happened 3 years ago, or whenever I drink it.
Harrison?
Yeah, John. So I always try and wheeze on my way out of these and to pick some alternative thing Johnson thought of. He won't let me do it ever. So I'm probably not even going to try. So I say, although that may change in 30 seconds. I guess if that's the scenario, you're handing me your cool, goofy marshmallow imperial stout thing aged in, Lincoln logs, and I'm going to sit on that I'm going to cellar it. I am. And it's probably the biggest reason for right now is that I'm kind of a victim of my own patterns and habits. And we've had 2 big dark beers back to back. And now all I want to do is drink cellared big dark beers. So my mind right now is thinking about what else is in my cellar? What can I cellar that I have that I was going to drink that I may enjoy more later? It's obviously all subjective, but that feeling that I had tonight, I think we all kind of had of right before you open it up of, is there going to be any CO2? Is this going to be good or not? Like, that's a fun experience that you shouldn't be having from a beer you just bought that was, just packaged. So I do like that, the kind of chance and science and whatever you want to call it that comes into play with this, especially if it's a beer well. And when you've had a bunch and you have the opportunity to sit on something for longer, then that's a no-brainer for me. But yeah, I'm gonna do it too. I'm gonna summon the willpower from within and say, I will wait on you, John's, Abraham Lincoln Lager, whatever it is. We'll sit that down for a while and try it next year. What about you, John? What's the thinking?
That means a lot to me, Harrison, that you would age my Abraham double Lincoln Bach Lager.
Right. That's it. The hot ham, the Abraham. That's right. Yep.
Hot ham is going to be the name of the brewery. I would. So I'll. Part of me is going to go against the trend here, just because that's what I do. But I'm going to drink it right away, and I'm going to do it because one of my favorite things is drinking a cellared beer. It's an amazing beer. I wish that you would be able to buy them off the shelf easier, but it's more fun for me to be able to compare this 3-year-old Black Ops with what the fresh version tasted like and see what that change actually did. So for me, I'm going to drink it right away, and I'm going to hope, as is how I live my life, that I find someone that has cellared it and I can be friends with them and we can share it, or we can trade later down the road. But I agree. I think Jenn made a great point, and we all kind of referenced it in our cellaring nightmares, that a lot of times you're not just cellaring a beer in the hopes that it gets better with time, but you're kind of holding on to a memory. So there's a beautiful nostalgia involved in that. But on the other end, we kind of gave a good lesson in economics as well. You should have a savings account, and that's your beer cellar. So either way, hopefully you're taking something valuable away from listening to our longest show ever.
That's right.
If you need to catch up, if you want to learn more about Jenn, she's in the Facebook group, so you can talk to her on there. Or we're going to put links to her show and her social media in the show notes for this episode at podcast.untappd.com. If you have any questions or feedback, you can connect directly with Untappd at Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or directly with us, Harrison.
Yeah, I'd tell you, facebook.com/drinking socially. And once again, thanks, Jenn, for coming out today, or we all, I guess no one went anywhere, but for joining us today in this virtual bar created in the internet, in space, wherever this internet comes from. But it's been a blast. The beer is working. And other than that, we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
All right.
Cheers.
Thank you guys.
Cheers.